One thing about the new skin modifier I've noticed in 2.8, if you don't explicitly set where you want the root to be, you'll get that square artifact on the end of one of your arms. So you always want to make sure to set your root down to be somewhere like the hips or somewhere out of the way. Just one second, guys. I have something I have to do really quick, and then we'll be good to go. Okay, there we go. Sorry about that, just had some noise going on in the background. Quaternius, let me check it out. Oh, that's really cool, man. Is that fully 3D? Let's see here. Yeah, that's very cool. Did you come up with the concept yourself, or was this based on somebody else's art? So the first thing when you're working on a character like this is to nail those proportions down, because at the end of the day, this is a pretty simple character. We've got basically the ball head, the body, the armor. Overall, it's pretty simple. So you want to make sure to nail that silhouette right away. But at the same time, working on a character like this, it is kind of tricky to nail the silhouette because it's not only mostly hidden by his coat, etc., but he's kind of just almost a blob in this whole area. So we're going to have to basically use our knowledge of 3D and logically superimpose where we think his arms are and how his shoulders are going to connect, etc. And I'm just blocking this out with the skin modifier first. So I'm going to use metaballs here to sort of block out where his beard is. And you would never use this as your final, but I can use this to roughly visualize how it's going to mask off his head to help me get the positioning of his head correct. So I'm just going to try to get this sort of nice taper, the smooth transition here. And I feel like his head is a bit too high right now. So I'm going to bring this down a bit. Bring down his horns as well. My guy also still feels taller, and I feel like it's because his legs are too long. And a lot of people like to work from like a common base mesh when they create characters. Honestly, I don't like to do that. I prefer to create a new base mesh each time, just because a lot of times I find there are special requirements that are needed for each character. And also, it doesn't really take that long. I mean, this part of the process will take maybe 30 minutes, and then I get to move on to more of the actual character creation. This is kind of just laying out the groundwork. It also helps me actually develop my eye for proportion, and I feel like it's always a good thing to be training your eye to be able to create something with the fewest number of strokes, right? It's like sculpting. You want to be able to create a base shape by understanding it and do it in very few strokes. If you look at master sculptors like Shane Olson, Raphael Grassetti, part of what sets them apart is the fact that they can create something that looks really good, really fast, and it's not because they work quickly. Like their cursor isn't moving that fast around the screen if you watch. It's because they can do it in very few strokes, which is, I think, a very good skill to have, and it's a skill you obviously need to develop. Trying to get that arm length right. Another interesting thing about JaniceChu's characters is a lot of them have really thin arms, and they're usually covered by cloaks, but on this character he's a bit beefier. So I think I'm gonna go ahead and interpret that his upper arm is gonna be thicker and then taper down a bit. And we can always adjust this later on, of course. Just going to use active element to rotate that while maintaining length so I can get him more in a T-pose. Okay, so we'll call that our base for now since it's got all the main pieces of geometry we need. I'm going to go ahead and duplicate this guy, create a new collection, call this backup mesh 3.1. Move it to there, hide that guy, and save. Because this is still an experimental beta build, so you want to make sure to save often if you're going to use it. Because it doesn't crash that much, honestly, but I've noticed it crashes in some kind of interesting scenarios. Times you wouldn't expect it, so you want to make sure to have a backup. Just getting this guy ready for mirroring and for combining. Chop out an armhole for that guy. Start to get right size. I'm also going to cut down on the edge loops here because I don't need them right now. And the less edge loops there are, the more easily I can affect the contour of his body. And plus, you know, this guy's going to eventually be more towards a game asset since I feel like he's suited for that style. So might as well go and start prepping for that. Okay, I'm not going to go attach the head yet. I can just jump right into sculpt mode now and start fixing these connections and getting them to look a little bit more natural. Gonna cut down edge loops here too. Same deal as before. Oh yeah, if there are any Blender users watching, you need to install the Loop Tools add-on. It's one of the default add-ons that actually comes with Blender, but it's not turned on by default. So if you just go to your preferences and turn this on, it gives you some really useful tools like relaxing, circle, and just multiple other functions that you can run on vertices. So for these guys, I just use the relax tool to make it so they're a little less jagged. If you're not using that, use it. It's very, very useful. I'm gonna go and grab the horns actually from this group as well, since I forgot to bring those over to my other one. Okay, so now we can actually refine his shape a bit. His entire shape seems to be more like an A, honestly. He's got like this kind of A shape to his body, and then it goes to his legs, which are kind of their own separate triangle. So we're going to go ahead and start to replicate that a bit on our actual model. Honestly, I'm going to go and actually apply my mirror modifier. I'll slice him in half again later, but I want to be able to see both sides while I sculpt here. So I'm going to go ahead and apply that, and then we'll jump back into sculpt mode and start getting his shapes into a better situation. This guy's neck's also kind of a question. It's like, logically I feel like his shoulders could end there, right? And then go down to his arms, which would leave here to a neck before this kind of mask goes on top. I'm not sure if that's actually how it is. I'm gonna just assume for the time being that he's got shoulders. Let's add a little bit more data here. Let's assume his shoulders are there for now. and that he's got a bit of a neck before it goes into this sort of ball that is his head. I'm gonna go and add a multi-res just so I can work on the shape with a little bit more data, and then I'll apply it to base so it'll conform to that shape. So we got 2 holes, just patch those really quick. Just trying to get some of that arc from the spine in there. Also, we're gonna mess with Blender 2.8's new shading features a bit, since they make your model look like 10 times better without doing anything. So I was doing some sketches of this guy to kind of prep for the animation part. I was doing some storyboards, and I kind of messed around with some muscle definition on this guy, like kind of subtle, but giving him a little bit of deltoid, making so you could see a little bit of the muscle development on his arms, and I kind of liked how it looked. I mean, he looks like he's a bit more of a heroic character, and with these big gauntlets on his hands, it seems like he definitely would have at least a little bit of musculature to him. So I figured that we could do that. It's not something I normally do on JaniceChu's characters. Usually I leave those to just have sort of very simple planes that represent the major shapes of the body. So we're gonna change that up a little bit on this guy to try to push his quality a little bit higher. And we're in some of those basic landmarks. Let's push the spine in. I don't think I'm going to give him sort of a butt in this particular model, though. Honestly, normally it's important to balance your character's weight, which sounds kind of silly, but it's actually very important to balance their back and front, otherwise their eyes just pick up something is wrong. In this case, though, I think it won't be that big of a deal. He's going to be kind of bulky from his armor. kind of defining those front and side planes, since he is a little bit cuboidal in the actual concept. So I'm just trying to make it so that once I start extracting geometry from his mesh for his clothes, I will have a clear distinction between the front and sides and already have in my edge creases. So it'll be consistent across his model and his props. His deltoids might be a bit much right now. Apply base. I'm going to check my model, which looks pretty good. Clear that guy out. And I just lost all of my data that I actually sculpted in, but that's actually fine because when I hit apply base, it applied most of that information down to his low poly mesh. And it kind of actually simplified a lot of the forms I put in, which is exactly what I wanted. I'm just going to do a simple subdivision surface modifier now to go ahead and smooth them out. And honestly, I think we only need a level 1. Level 2 is not really necessary. Do a little bit of smoothing on his wrists. Although, you know, let's actually do this just with our poly editing tools. Okay, so I think we're going to go ahead and remirror this guy now and jump back into the actual editing of his topology. It's one thing I still get a little bit confused sometimes when I'm working in Blender 2.8. I try to use like Z and some of the other hotkeys from 2.7, and they're all in a pie menu now, so I'll kind of jump back and forth in the pie menu. Okay, we can simplify his neck too. This is way too much data for what we're doing. Need that? Yes. Okay, so I feel like his head is... You know, I can't tell. His head looks a little bit too big to me right now, but I know that we don't have all our props in yet. So I'm going to go ahead and adjust his head and start adding in props, and then we can go back and adjust it later if we need to. Simplify his angles and feet a little bit, and then we'll start adding in those props. Honestly, I think what I have right now is actually incorrect. I think it's an angle thing. I think his ankle, this sort of shape goes all the way down to his actual foot. So let's go ahead and see how that looks. Yeah, I like that better. We still need to define a bit of his ankle, so I'm going to go ahead and bevel this guy. But I think having this shape go all the way down makes a lot more sense and just looks a little bit better. Turn this into something a little bit more like a shoe. It's always kind of confusing when I look around and the bottom of his foot is curved, particularly since I a lot of times imagine him standing on a plane just when I visualize the model in my head. And also give him a little bit flatter feet. Okay, so yeah, definitely an improvement over our initial blockout already. I like to jump back and forth between the old version and the new version to kind of make sure I've kept sort of my original vision and also to see how I'm progressing. I find it very useful. Go ahead and get these guys' gauntlets added. That's one other thing you'll notice I've done. Instead of just using the local mirror and using the origin, I've added an empty to the center of my scene, and I'm mirroring around that. And that's useful because it actually allows me to take this object and freely move it while keeping its origin at its center, so I can rotate it and scale it more accurately. But we still get accurate mirroring to our character. I find it to be a lot less destructive. You can also just mirror around your actual character mesh, and I find that's easy sometimes, and it's sometimes gets you a more accurate mirror, but I find orbiting around something that is actually already set to the origin of your world is better, since it's best practice to actually have your origin around the center anyway. Another advantage is local transformations, which are extremely valuable when you're modeling. Let's keep that flush for now. Next, he's got kind of like chest plate, so let's look for some reference really quick. Honestly, I know she has kind of a Japanese aesthetic in a lot of her work, and this looks like a very Japanese piece of armor to me. And I also feel like I can just barely see some lines, so I'm going to go with this kind of Japanese segmented armor. Yeah, let's go with this guy. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and extract the base from actually my mesh already. It'll save me time. Layering is also really important in your 3D models. It's like you'll notice you have your main body, and some people will try to sculpt armor directly into the mesh or do something similar where they have it all contained within one sort of character. I think it's important to use layered pieces of geometry since it allows you to work more non-destructively. You can combine later on. I mean, that's best practice for sort of games. But while you're building, you have freedom to do basically anything you want, as long as you can convert it quickly. Just cleaning up the topology a bit, since I don't want the edge loops to be at angles. I'm just flattening them out by scaling them on the z-axis to 0. and then making sure it's actually encompassing my character. This one can be at an angle, just because it has to be to go up or to the neck. I'm going to cut this a little bit lower. I also want to make sure my topology is pretty even here, since I think I'm going to apply my subdivision surface modifier to get the geometry I need to create the plates. So we're going to simplify this because we don't want it to be this complicated, but at the same time we want to keep the kind of same feel. So I'm trying to figure out how many plates we want to do. Yeah, I think that'll work. Plus this way I actually have control over the independent plates, which I think is a good idea. Apparently I just accidentally hit a hotkey to turn off my X-ray. So let me make sure I'm not clipping through the mesh here. Too many plates. I think let's go with 2. This just seems like too many. So 2 major plates on the body, and then we'll go ahead and add additional ones around the upper chest area. Yeah, I like that a lot better. I also like the dynamic of there being the larger plate and then the smaller one, and then the trim for the armor. So it goes from like our main shape to our secondary to our tertiary in a very linear way. Has anybody got their hands on the Dreams Early Access? I actually managed to grab one. It's super interesting. They've simplified like a lot of game creation tools down to like only the essentials. So it's like you can make basically anything on a PS4 now, but it's like, it reminds me so much of Unity and other actual game engines. It's just subtly different, a little bit more simplified. Sculpt mode I'm still getting used to though. It's also interesting because it doesn't work off of any of the sort of fundamentals of sculpting you're taught in 3D modeling. In 3D modeling, you're pushing and pulling vertices, right? So there's data there, you move it around, you're basically just doing polygon modeling, but with a fall off. So it's really, honestly, not that much different from topological modeling. Versus Dreams, which works off of a Boolean system. So you take your base shapes, you put them down, and then you chop out afterwards or add to. There's no smearing, there's no grab brush, there's no smooth brush. It's very interesting. Very challenging to work with. Reminds me a lot more of traditional clay, which is kind of cool. We'll leave that like that for now. Let's go ahead and add the studs to his gauntlets. And we're going to make the studs part of the main gauntlet later on. We're not going to do that yet because I want to be able to adjust them freely. But all of this, when we're done, we're going to combine into one central mesh, like it would be for games or something like that. Something about mine does not... feels off from the concept. Is it? I think it's partially their scale. I think mine are too small. I think his arms are longer than I have. And then these are actually larger because mine look really dinky compared to his. Oh boy, there it goes. Accidentally just ran a dissolve operation on a bunch of faces. Whoa. Sometimes when you work on my character and then you sort of change it to just to match the concept and you look at it, it just looks really weird in 3D. Like that cannot be right. But it like feels right. It looks wrong but feels right. So this has got to be shorter because his arms are only coming down past his waist a bit. How long are these now? Wow, that actually is like about right. That's bizarre. Okay, let's go ahead and get next. So I wonder what's going on in his upper arms, because for me, I just have to guess, because I can't see those. I'm thinking they need to be bulked up, because I want it to at least look a little bit like he could actually carry this thing. Let's leave it about there for now. So let's take a look at his groin really quickly. Something about it is throwing me off right now. Some pinching going on there. These are all... Oh, okay, there's the issue. This is a tri, not a quad. I was just noticing a shading artifact. I was wondering where it was coming from. Smooth that out a bit. That looks better. Yeah, much better. Okay, let's go ahead and mock up. Let's go ahead and detail his head a bit, actually, because I want to get more of a feel for the character. And I think that his head is mostly what's driving his emotion, obviously. To Boolean or not to Boolean? That's not Boolean. It'll save us time later on. I also feel like this is a mask, so I'm extending it down here a bit, so it's like it's his eye, but at the same time his neck can also go into this if necessary. Plus I think it'll give us a better read. Okay, that is too wide right now, and also his horns are obviously wrong. So it looks like he has like these bunny ears, and then the horns actually go behind them. So let's go ahead and say that it's a scoop out like this, creating a notch. And that actually is a lot more interesting from a read perspective anyway. So those would go about there. And then he would have sort of bunny ears coming out here. Too wide. I might need to create a new bevel just for these, because if I move this edge loop right here too much to sort of accommodate that sort of bunny ear or whatever it is, then it's actually going to mess up the spherical read of his head, and we'll get a different silhouette, which we really don't want. We'll do that for now. I can always adjust this later if necessary. Let's get some of that curvature in there. Okay, and they're going to be resting in this sort of wider resting area. So I'm going to go and put that in as well, since it looks a little weird right now because his horns are actually not wide enough to fill that gap. And I'm also going to use Mark Sharp here to get that nice clean edge, since I don't want to actually do any edge loops in that particular area. And I'm also going to turn on Auto Smooth so we get a little bit of a sharper cutout. And adjust this 50. And then mark the edges I actually would like to be. Let's do the same thing here, honestly. Mark these as sharp, is what I was saying, sorry. These still feel too thick, so we're going to pull this back a bit. And his eye still feels a little bit like too wide. I'm trying to decide if I want to leave it wider for readability's sake in 3D, or if I want to make it narrower. Make it narrower, just to be more accurate to the concept for now. Again, we can change that later. Okay, we're gonna go and put in his beard now, since that's a very important part. It's the transition from his head to his armor, and it's gonna sort of visually mess me up if I don't. So I'm gonna go ahead and drop this ball on here and just sculpt it. And also let's clear out my annotations since they're just hanging around. Let's jump to 5 row first. And we'll work with symmetry at first, and then I'll turn it off later when I start to adjust the shape. Make sure we're on subdivide collapse. Seems to wrap around his head a bit too, so we're gonna go and pull up these edges. Falls to his belt, which if we imagine his belt here, probably be about there. Although actually, so his beard's made of 2 parts. We've got the fluff part and then we have the braid. So I think we're gonna keep those separate so for more artistic freedom. So I'm gonna keep this part as the fluff, which comes up to the top of, to the middle of his plate, which would be about here. And then I'm gonna add another ball, which we're going to use as his braid. And one thing that'll be easy to adjust is the length of the braid, so I'm actually going to focus more on the shape right now and not worry so much about the length. I'm just going to eyeball it, and when I add in the extra belt and armor later on, I can adjust it then. Thanks, the Giuseppe. Sorry, I have no idea how to pronounce that. Giuseppe. Glad you like it so far. We're going to try to get done to this stage tonight. Honestly, things are going to start to go pretty fast once things are blocked out a little bit better. Havo Creeper, I mean Blender 2.7 or 8, because if you're just starting to learn Blender, honestly, I'd start learning Blender 2.8 since it's a lot better. There's more documentation for 2.7 at this point, but 2.8 really is just better. So you might as well learn it before they release the official version and everyone's forced to switch anyway. They are very similar though, so I would say a lot of the training is interchangeable. And there's tons of... And there's the community is really useful right now. If you find like a command in an older piece of documentation and you're looking for it, just Google search where is this command in 2.8, and I'm sure the community already has an answer out. Okay, so this beard has kind of these iconic marshmallow tufts that JaniceChu has in a lot of her work. So I'm going to go ahead and use the snake hook brush to pull those out. Then I'm going to use the inflate brush to make them look a little softer. Okay, I'm going to use the scrape brush to get a little bit more of that fall off shape we're seeing. So I'm just going to scratch this guy out. I can add more texture to the beard later on. I just want to make sure I have the sort of overall shape down before I start detailing. Like, see, it needs to wrap up more on the front, I think. Honestly, it reminds me of a turtleneck, the way it's sort of resting. It's got like the cloth fold at the top, which would be your contact fold. And then it's got the sort of concave area, which is what you get in like a cloth again, and then it goes out of that again with the hump. Hi, Twitch PJ. So yeah, the UI changed a fair bit. Honestly, when you first jump into it, you're going to be really confused. But let me jump back into object mode. All of the same buttons are here. Like you've got your object, add, all of these sort of same menu pieces that are usually down here. They've just been shuffled around. And then all your modeling tools are basically the same as well, but there's also hotkeys for them on the left side. The biggest change that honestly is takes some sort of learning altogether is the sort of hierarchy system. So everything is nested in collections now instead of the layer system you had previously. Previously in Blender, you could move things around using this sort of box system at the bottom. And I still have both on my computer, by the way. I'll be switching over to 2.8 almost entirely soon, but I'm keeping 2.79 just in case. Just because it has a little bit more stable export right now. So you'll be familiar with this kind of layer system, which allows you to move objects between them. That's not the case anymore. Now, whenever you create an object, it is added to the default collection, unless you grab something and then hit M, which would normally be your layer transfer in 2.79, and then hit new collection, and then create a new collection, and it'll show up here. And you can now toggle visibility per collection, renderability, and selectability. And you still have your list of objects here. So that takes some relearning, but honestly, I think that it's better. It forces people to be a bit more organized when they wouldn't be otherwise. Which, yeah, nobody likes being forced to be more organized, but it really is useful when you're working with a complex character or scene. It's just better. Also, when you have to hand your file off, it's a lot better as well. Just make sure you name your layers. It might be a scarf, honestly. It does have this braid going on right here, which makes me think it's a beard. But on the flip side, it looks like it was a scarf here, because it looks like the coat was going over the top of it. And he's more of a Norse character, so maybe this is like some kind of sheepskin. Maybe it's a sheepskin ruff, and then he has like a goatee. This is one of the fun things about working on these more abstract characters. It's like... Yeah, that was kind of bugging me too, but technically a beard, if your jawline is here, it could go from here, right? And then if you had a really long beard, you just have it go over the back of your shoulder. Like that. So yeah, I wouldn't do this, but we actually don't have proof it's doing that. I'm assuming it's doing that. Also, I think it looks better if it does do that. At least a bit. Let me see. Let me try scraping it. We'll see. Let's play. Is it a beard? I think you're right, honestly. I think it is some kind of skin, and then he has a goatee. Because I don't think you'd be braiding your goat skin. But I'm gonna focus on sculpting it. I can figure out what it is later. Honestly, I found myself saying that a lot when I work on JaniceChuConcept. I'm like, what on earth is this? And then I kind of just shrug and I'm like, well, I just have to make it. As long as it looks like the concept, people will be like, oh, he copied the concept so accurately. Okay, I'm gonna go and break symmetry and start adding those like more detailed ruffles since I'm actually pretty happy with my overall shape now. So I'm just making this for fun right now. Honestly, this is more probably going to be used for animation. I was concepting a couple ideas for like an intro animation with this guy just for fun, but mostly this is just being made for as a 3D model, possibly for animation depending on if I have time. Yeah, you could. You could have it exported as an STL and print it, but you would have to prep the file first, obviously. You just have to merge it all as one file, or one object, sorry. Make sure it's watertight, you know, all those kinds of rules. But yeah, you definitely could get this 3D printed if you wanted. Let's take a look at how other people have been sculpting beards. No, that's ugly. I feel like this is more towards the right direction, but it's still too realistic. Let's see, Michelangelo. What do we got? I love how Michelangelo does his hair. Very cool. So he visualizes it as kind of like tubes, independent tubes that twist together. I think this guy's hair is a really good reference. Always get reference. Always. Okay, let's go with what I got. I think I can stylize that. Sorry, I have no idea where you want me to go back to. There's a bit of a delay on the chat. Back to here. Zeus. Nope, that's Hercules. This one. Nope. Yeah, so this is pretty cool. It's a good reference. I feel like this is a bit more flowing, if that makes sense. I need something that's got some more curls on it to make it look a little bit more like a sheep. But yeah, that is definitely cool. It's crazy is we do this kind of stuff digitally, right? But this was done in stone with a chisel. It just blows my mind every time. Like, I even do some traditional sculpting with clay, but it's like, even in clay, you can like add and subtract, and adding is a big deal. These people, when they're working in stone, they have to like perfectly visualize, and then they have to just sculpt it. There's no, and if they mess up, they basically just have to work with it. I'm actually going to have both references open at the same time since I want to make sure I don't make this too realistic and I still capture the feeling of the concept. And I'm going to focus a little bit longer on the beard than I did some of the other elements, even though this is just part of the blockout, because it's, I feel like, a very important element to his entire character. Or his fleece, sorry. It partially would, but honestly, a fleece is pretty similar to this kind of thing. This looks more like a skin, like literally like an animal skin that has been cured and set up for this kind of thing. So it'd be pretty similar. So it's not like a sweater or like a, what we tend to think of when we say fleece, right? I'm thinking like a literal sheepskin. Plus that makes sense because he looks like he's more like Norse. I'm just guessing by like the horns and so, I mean, this is almost more Chinese. But then this still feels Norse to me, and this almost looks Egyptian, so I think this is kind of a blend. Anyway, the Norse were known to have like these huge fleece. Okay, I sort of like where that's going, but it's starting to look a little too billowy, so we're gonna go ahead and scrape it a bit. I'm going to do like smaller, lighter scrapes. Yeah, I really like how it's starting to look. It's one of the nice things about dynamic topology. You get these kind of unintentional creases in your sculpt, which you can actually then go ahead and accentuate with your other brushes. Like, I really like how we're starting to get these subtle creases. pull this in a bit and pull that out to create kind of this more resting look on his shoulders. And then it looks like we're also getting just some sort of puffing right here. So I'm going to go ahead and add that in, and then we're going to move on because we're not going to get anywhere if I spend this long on the rest of the block out. Also, JaniceChuConcept does something similar to this, which is, it always looks really nice when we mix it with Substance Painter. So we're gonna go and steal that. I am a game dev, so I mostly do 3D art for games. So I'm not sort of a game developer, but I work in game development. I'm trying to learn more about making my own games, but that is very complicated. So long learning path. Okay, I'm gonna go and clean those up and then we'll call it good. I really kind of like this texture. I should apply it to the front at some point. We'll do that later on since that's a finer detail and it'll actually mess up the sort of simple read I'm going for right now. Let's do a subtle version. Yeah, that's fine. We'll stick with that for now. Let's go ahead and jump down to the next part and come back to this later once we have more of the elements blocked in, since we don't want to become hyper-focused. Okay, let's do the rest of his beard. Make this a little longer. That guy out. I'll add in the strands, but first I want to kind of make sure my shape is right before I start putting in the bindings for his beard. And let's reactivate mirror. Okay, let's see here. So you think that's underneath the helmet. So I think that's actually part of the reason why Norse actually sometimes would wear those sort of furs around their neck, would be part of protection. I know in ancient Greece they had leather armor, or at least leather garments they would basically just use as armor. So this could just be, basically this is that part, but it's just fur, or, you know, hide. I still remember I read this legend about when Theseus went up against this wild man of the mountains and he protected himself with this cloth shield. Like the way he literally protected his arm when he fought this guy was he just wrapped this linen around his arm so many times that he could protect himself from club blows and from swords. It's very interesting. I love mythology, it's awesome. He actually used it as a foil at one point too, which was cool. The guy tried to stab him in the arm, and it perforated the cloth, but not all the way through, and then he was able to tuck it away from him. We're going to go and put in these sort of beard bindings, and we'll use the solidify modifier to get them to push into the beard, and then we'll sculpt around those. That way we don't have to worry about trying to sculpt this shape into the beard, since that would be kind of tedious. You could use a curve for this. I actually prefer using geometry since I feel like it gives me more control. But if you are comfortable doing with this with a curve, there's also the solidify modifier works on that as well, and you will definitely get smoother arcs very quickly. So if you prefer that, definitely give it a try. This is in the back, so it doesn't really matter, but I want to make sure we have a pretty good wrap. Okay, let's do shrink wrap to get this guy on here properly, and then we'll do a solidify to create more of the strap look, and then we'll do a subdivision on top of that. And we're going to grab these edges and harden those, and then smooth this guy out. And then that gives us our strap. Although I believe in this case we can also do project and just shrink our geometry inside to get a bit of a more accurate bind, and then we can duplicate this guy so he's got kind of a braid going on, so we've got this one on top of this one, on top of this one. So let's do project to surface point, since I feel like that'll actually be better in this case. And we're going to go back into our edit mode, and I'm going to enable face snapping, and going to go ahead and turn on top. For anybody who's using older versions of Blender, in front is basically X-ray mode. And I'm also going to make it so I can see what our solidify modifier is doing in 3D space. And this will allow me to just visualize what all my modifiers are doing while I actually edit the topology. Okay, cool. So let's go ahead and bring down the other part of the curve. And we'll actually tuck this behind here. So let's go and turn off snapping for a second, and I will go back after I apply my shrink wrap and just tuck that underneath. Which is a bit of a cheat, but honestly, if you can't cheat in 3D, then what's the point? Okay, that's gonna be our second one, and then we just need one last one, and then the main braid, or the main holder, whatever you want to call it. Okay, sorry, I had to take care of something. Okay, so let's go ahead and get this strap in here, and then we'll put in our central loop and then sculpt the actual beard itself. Also, you'll notice I'm using the sharpen, or the mark edge, instead of actually using a edge loop, because if I use an edge loop, then that can cause issues with the shrink wrap modifier later on. And you already notice it's causing issues here, but in this case I actually need to use it. Just flipping my normals there since they were not aligned properly. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and apply my shrink wrap, and now I'm going to move these around manually to kind of get the folds I want. I'm also going to activate auto smooth to try to get rid of those edges that we were seeing. Tuck this edge down. Just going to use proportional editing just to get this to the shape I want. And turn off of in front. Doing thin straps like this is always a pain. And a lot of people would sculpt it in, but I think that we'll see return when we don't have to worry about sculpting into our straps. Okay, that looks pretty good. Let's bump this out, and also let's ditch these for now. And we'll just mark these as sharp since I actually prefer how that looks. Same thing, gonna go ahead and turn on auto smooth for this. Just as a note for people using 2.7, auto smooth is now down here. It used to be at the top here, and it took me a while to find it. But if you go down to normals here, it's right here. And it has the same rules as before. It has its own drop-down node as well. Okay, let's sculpt his beard. Okay, we're gonna use the inflate brush to inflate around these. We're gonna need symmetry to be off in this case. We're also going to use the crease brush to sort of put an edge on this because we don't want it to look like marshmallow. That's something we have going on in his fleece, but in this case, I feel like we should have more of a sculpted look to his beard. And you'll notice a lot of times what I do is I sort of will build something up and then I'll take the scrape brush to it. And that's just how I work. But one of the main reasons I actually do that is it's kind of reminiscent of traditional sculpture, where you'll build something up and then you'll carve out and then flatten it out with your spatula. And I find it to be a very effective way of kind of getting the shapes that I want. I think that looks pretty good. I like how we're getting a subtle beveling here, which is nice. So I'm going to reinforce that slightly. And then we're going to go ahead and do an approximation of the tufts in his beard, and we'll move on. Going to use the snake hook brush to start pulling these out a bit. And we're going to hit this with the smooth brush, so it's going to look kind of crappy at first. But after we smooth it out and inflate it, we'll get kind of a bit better blending between the different strands. And then also I'm going to continue it just a bit into this area, since in case we might see it from underneath, and I never like seeing areas that aren't sculpted. It looks kind of like a hand right now. That's creepy. Okay, let's go ahead and start putting in our creases for the hair. And then same thing as before, we're going to use the scrape tool to scrape around a bit. And also we're going to smooth out the base a bit. Also our ring on his beard's a little bit big, so we're going to shrink that down. Still not getting the blending I want between these, so we're going to hit this with a pinch brush. I think I also made the mistake of making it too consistent. So it's like hair, 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 hair. They're almost evenly spaced, which you definitely do not want for something organic like hair. So let's go ahead and fix that. It's a little bit better. Still looks meh, but Let's not focus on it too much since we're not finalizing this yet. Hair has always been tricky for me, honestly. That's why I keep doing these like little steadies on here. Like in my portfolio, there's this green girl sitting on a bench. Literally the entire reason I put that piece together was just to focus on how to sculpt hair. Oh, I don't even have dynamic topology on. That's the issue right there. Hate it when I do that. I was wondering, because without dynamic topology on, you don't get extra... Yep, my pleasure. Glad you enjoyed it. I will upload these onto YouTube and put a link on my Twitter as well, so you can watch the rest there. Also, my shape is wrong, so I should probably focus on that as well. Okay, you know what? I'm going to just flatten this out since I don't like how it looks now. I will come back to this later and just get its shape right for now, since I am investing way too much time in it, and that's one of the biggest things you need to be careful not to do when you're trying to get your character overall just blocked out. I think that looks fine for now. So we're going to jump back to object mode. And now we're going to jump on to the next part, but I'm going to make this a bit thicker first. And also, let's make this a little bit softer. There we go, that's better. Okay, let's go ahead and get his front armor plate done and then move on to his lower body and go from there. Make up for this some last time. Okay. Things have quieted down a bit, so I'm going to go and turn my mic back on. Okay, so we have most of our base here now. I'm going to go ahead and block out his sort of baggy pants that are underneath here, and then it looks like he has a tunic on top of that, so we'll put that on next. It doesn't... His legs are a little bit narrower in the concept. They do have these bags, but they're not quite this emphasized. So I'm going to lower these, but first I'm going to model them large just so I can see what I'm doing. And now that I'm done with that, I'm actually going to scale them down. You also want to make sure you always have even topology when you're working with subdivision surface. So since I'm adding a new ring here, I'm going to go and delete these and make sure that we're not having any strange pinching or any other topological errors. Sorry. So we're getting a double triangle here, so I gotta find a way to avoid that. So there we go, now we've got all quads again. Hit this with a really low power smooth brush, just go ahead and make sure that we have good transitions. Jump back into object mode, let's see how it looks. I'm going to make his thighs a little bit thinner to accommodate his pants. Which, when you have a character that's locked down, like you actually have a body sheet, you want to do that sometimes, but usually you check with the concept artist or whoever you're making the character for to make sure they're not trying to make sure he stays same proportions all the time. Particularly for a character in animation where their outfits are going to be swapped, you really don't want to try to force their body to match the clothes. Like this. A corrective shape key might work, or something along those lines, but in general, don't do that. In this case, though, it doesn't matter for two reasons. One being I'm the one I'm making this for, and I know it's not going to be an issue. And also because I don't feel like it's actually going to damage our overall character. Okay, let's do his tunic. Okay, so this part's kind of confusing actually, because this looks like a tunic. The texturing makes sense, and the fact that it's layered on top of his pants. We're getting a drop shadow as well, so I'm pretty sure that's what the artist intended. But a tunic wouldn't have a split here. A tunic would just go around like this, and would be similar to Egyptian sort of tunics. So I'm not sure what's going on there. Okay, I'm going to model it as a tunic, how I would imagine it, and if it looks strange, I will fix it. And I'm going to leave that right here for now. After I add the tunic, we'll see how that looks. Add a quick mirror modifier, set that to clipping. Just get this shape to match our character. flare this out a bit. And then extrude upward again and scale in, because when I add the subdivision surface, we want it to average the distance of the polygons that are up here with the ones that are down there, creating a smooth arc. And then we're going to cap it just because it's good practice. Go ahead and put this on the outside since that's layered on top. And then bring this down to where it would be, which would be about there, it looks like. Okay, and we're also going to make this a little bit wider to accommodate the cloth that tucks into it. There we go. Okay. Let's take a look at what this would look like if I crease this upward, since I am not sure. I feel like there was an Egyptian kilt that went up in the center like that. Yeah, so I think just due to the way that it was tucked up higher, I think it actually would cause it to rise in the center, which might be what's going on in this case. Okay. Let's see here. Thought there'd be more traditional illustrations, honestly. There we go. This is what I was thinking of. It's like wrapped up in the center, which causes this V shape. So let's say it's doing that, since I actually really like this curved shape we're getting here. So if that's happening, that means it's cloth under tension, which means that these would be brought up. Okay, make sure that this still is a smooth arc. And I'm going to flatten this out a bit. I feel like it's a little too curved right now. Bring it back, scale it up a bit. Get smooth. We're going to go and also apply auto smooth. Go ahead and get the nice edge. And apply our scale to get a cleaner use for the solidify modifier. Now I just feel like this needs to be slightly higher. Okay, so I feel like my guy looks a little bit taller, so an easy fix for that is just to make his head slightly bigger. So we're gonna make his head a little bit bigger. And I also feel like my overall shape is not as A. It's like not as triangular as it is in the actual concept. So we're going to fix that with a lattice at the end. So we don't have to worry about doing that now, but it's just something that to keep in mind as we move forward is that the shape isn't correct as of now. We're going to need to correct that later on. and then his cape, that's what I'm missing. Okay, so we can mirror this at first to get the base shape, and then we will stop mirroring it later on again to sort of get some of the wrinkles in. And instead of sculpting in this particular case, our final will be sculpted, but I'm going to use a quick modeling trick to get an approximation of wrinkles on the actual cape itself. Just because the modeling is faster, honestly. Capes are kind of tricky to do in T-pose, honestly. When you use an actual cloth simulation, it's not a big deal. When you're trying to model something, it can be tricky because modeling a cape in T-pose is completely different from modeling it in the concept pose. Let's go ahead and shut this off, and then isolate it really quickly to just take a look at our geometry. I think we're going to let's increase the data here. And then I also don't like how this is stretching, so we're going to put a new cut there. Use that to create the curve, and do that. Same here. Add the topology we need, and then average the distance between those two. Oh, and we are not clipping, so we're going to want to enable that and grab our center line. Pull that up together. Also, we see this shape happening in the concept. So that could be either because there's a hole in his cape, or it could be because he has more of like a horseshoe cape. I will try out both and see which one I prefer, but I feel like having a more of a horseshoe shaped cape is kind of an interesting thing that we can play off of. It's also floating off his body a bit right now, so we're going to grab the whole thing and bring that in. It's kind of boring, so let's go ahead and give that taper that we have in the concept back. So it's a little bit more like that. And then we're going to pull all of this in. Add another loop cut right here and pull this up to get a little bit of a smoother shape. Okay. I mean, that looks fine for our purposes. We're going to curve the edge in a bit. But I know the coat is going to be either totally different when it's simulated, or sorry, the cape is going to be different when it's simulated or when we model in pose. And honestly, trying to get it look just like the concept while he's in a totally different pose when you're making something that relies entirely off of cloth dynamics is kind of silly. So what we're going to do is we're going to subdivide this and smooth it out, and then we're going to pull that up and pull this out, just clear those clipping issues, and then we're going to solidify. Okay, now let's see if this trick will work in this case. Normally it would, but I just realized since we're using the solidify modifier, it might not work as well. But let's give it a go. Another thing is you don't usually want to do this when you're mirroring. Wrinkles are very rarely mirrored. But, you know, honestly, so let's do one wrinkle down the back just to show that there is gravity. And then we're going to leave the rest until we do this into a better pose, because I keep looking at it and realizing there's not really a point in detailing it either, because we're not going to use this cape we're making right now so much as we're using this just as a placeholder to visualize. So we're going to bring all these down to make sure we're getting a nice sense of weight. Yeah, I don't like how the second one looks. So let's go ahead and sculpt, smooth that out a bit, back into object mode. You know what, let's not even do wrinkles at all. If you're not going to do them right, you might as well not do them in this case. At least that's how I feel about it. So we're going to go ahead and take this, add another subdivision underneath to give it a little bit more bevel to it. And then going to go and save. And now at this point I want to, let's go ahead and cut his horns since they are actually not pointed in the concept. And then also we need to sharpen this angle here. And then we're going to also go ahead and ditch the mirror modifier since we don't need that anymore and his horns are a little bit asymmetrical. This also needs to be facing more upward. And we can also smooth this out later. We don't need it to be perfect right now. I just want to get a pretty good approximation of the shape. Okay, it's looking pretty good. I feel like these stick out more than I had originally. And then I also feel like the front of this is flatter than I had originally. I added too much curvature, which I think is actually what's making it feel a little bit less sort of brutish. And then we're also going to widen out the end a bit and also narrow out the end a bit. Yeah, that's better. Okay, let's go ahead and add a solidify modifier to this. Cool. Go ahead and shade this one as well. Add a solidify modifier to this as well. It's just a quick way of adding cloth. In games, you usually won't want to use the solidify modifier though. You'd usually just grab the ends, extrude upwards, and then cap, since that's a little bit easier to rig, and also it doesn't create internal geometry, which is something that's a big no-no in games. And then also, let's go ahead and pinch this in the center. Make that a little bit wider. And if that's something I've kind of been wanting to experiment with now for as soon as I start making this guy actually, the effects on his gauntlet. So we're going to take a little bit of a break from modeling and do a quick test with some effects. So what we want to do is see how we can animate this efficiently. So we don't want to mirror in this case. We're going to go and apply that and save just in case we crash. We're going to add, I think, 2 sequences of meta balls. This is how I'm planning on doing this. We're going to have our particle primary. And then create a separate meta ball, which is going to be our smaller particles. So we're going to call it particle detail. Okay, so we need 2 layers of simulation. We need 1 layer, which is going to be our particle primary. And we need our timeline in this case, so we're going to go ahead and pull this guy up. And we want to try and increase the scale so we can actually see what's happening. And we're going to go ahead and set our field weights to be 0 on gravity temporarily. And then we also want to set our initial velocity down to 0. Since we want this to be something that's like smoke around his gauntlet. And we're going to turn our lifetime down to 5. So this is now giving us a sort of moving particle, right? Although it looks like it's not traveling, which is something I want as it moves. So let's try increasing this to 10. So also another issue might be, try doing this. Let's try going here, hitting I, we're going to key the location, jump this to here, and then hit I and key the location. There we go. So do you see how as it moves, just due to the way we've set the lifetime, the particles are actually lagging behind? This is the effect that I want in this case because smoke, when you move quickly, if it's heavy smoke, is very billowy and doesn't actually keep up with your arms. So we want there to be this bit of an after trail. And I think the timing is actually pretty good right now. So we're going to go ahead now and remove that animation since we know that our timing is right on that part. And we're also going to go ahead and lower the detail level on our metaballs to get a bit more of a jagged smoke, since that's something we see here. So we're going to set this to 0.7, see how that looks. We're going to need to set on some random scale so that we get a bit more variation. Okay, and we want this to be larger, and we want there to be bigger particles. We want extreme variation. We want some very small ones, some very large ones. And we're going to increase the detail a bit. Seems like that's too low, so let's try 0.5. That's better. And then we're also going to increase the volume, or at least, in this case, let's say, well, we'll just do this. Let's increase the number of particles to make it so that we get a higher density. So that's going to be our sort of base particle. Let me go ahead and make sure it's behaving properly in movement. So go here, and then we'll move to 80. And when we do that, we're going to move. Make sure you grab the right thing. Go to 80, move this to here. And then see how that moves. And yeah, I like how that looks. Okay, that's cool. So let's go ahead and add our secondary particles, which are going to be our detail particles. Create a new one. Go ahead and name this prime and second. Same thing as before. Go down here, go to object, set this to be our, what do we name this? Particle detail. So I'm gonna name this detail. Gonna go ahead and hit play so we can get a look at the difference. Interesting. So it seems like our main particle group isn't working anymore. Why? What changed? Okay, so why are you disappearing? You know, actually, we don't need to use a separate particle. So because I think that might be what's causing the issue. So let's go and improvise, go back to here, set this back to our primary particle. But we're going to make a couple differences. We're going to make this bigger again, just so we can see what's happening. And yeah, that seems to be getting a better effect. The thing's disappearing at least. Same thing, turn gravity down to 0. And we're going to turn our initial velocity down to 0.01. Okay, and we're going to end our keyframe at 100 really quickly. Okay, so what that's doing is just leaving a longer trail, which is not what we want. So let's put this down to 0, and then let's try putting this to 1. Because what we want it to move upwards. We want these to be smaller particles that will move upwards separately from the main. Okay, so that's kind of the right idea. So that's way too strong, so let's try 3. Okay, getting somewhere. Set the randomizing up to 3. A little too much, 2. There we go, it's better. We're gonna set this down to 2 as well, since they're moving a little too fast right now. Cool, and then we're gonna set the lifetime down to be something like 5. There we go. We were gonna want to go a little bit more because we want these to actually break away from the primary group. But what this is doing is it's giving us kind of a secondary smoke effect. And then we also want to increase the size again and increase our random size quite a bit. And lower our particle amount to be something more like 100. Let's try 200, a little bit higher, and then also increase our size again. And slightly longer lifetime so they break away a little bit farther. And now I'm going to check if this is a local rotation. Yeah, so that is not a global, it's object aligned. Okay. So if the velocity works off of the local coordinates of the object, you know, we can mess with that later, honestly. That's a more complicated issue. I don't want to solve right now. This is just a quick little thing. I just want to visualize how the smoke will look, and I'm not worried about fixing that as of now. Okay, so if the smoke looks like that, the next step is I want to turn this, I want to invert the normals on this object, which is challenging because metaballs are not your traditional object. They're actually a different type of data. You can convert them to mesh, which has normals, but that also kind of defeats the purpose. So let's go ahead and jump into our render view really quickly and assign a background, just so I can see what I'm doing. Just gonna grab one from my library. There we go. And we're gonna set this down to 0.5 in this case. And we're going to create a really quick little shader, and we're going to call this smoke test. Okay, we're going to first start out by making this an alpha blend material, since I know it's going to be partially transparent. Make sure you save. I've noticed Blender 2.8 has a problem with when you first transfer something over to an alpha blend material while you have the material being displayed. I imagine that's going to be something that they fix, but as of now it's an issue. Okay, let's see if I can recover my autosave. And then, did it save that I put them out? It did not, so I'm going to go and re-grab that texture and then save this time. Go down to 0.5. This time I'm going to be in solid view when I assign it to okay, there we go. So we're getting this kind of weird fractaling, and that's something else I've noticed that has been an issue in 2.8. But again, this is just a quick prototype. I'm not worried about it. So we're going to go ahead and start with just a pure emission shader. And we're going to grab what color we want our smoke to be. In this case, this sort of brown color. We're going to grab a mix shader, drop that in here, grab a transparent shader, plug that guy in there, and then we're going to do input layer weight, which creates a fall off based off of the camera's perception of a convex object and creates a gradient. And we're going to use this to create kind of a smoke material. And I'm going to add a quick back plane so we can actually see what's happening. Okay, so we're already getting something that looks kind of like smoke, but in this particular case, let's see here, do we want that to look like that? I want us to be able to see the hot metal in the center. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to turn inside out. Yeah, so I'm going to upload the video to YouTube, so you don't have to stick around for the whole thing. I'm going to wrap up pretty soon here, honestly. I'm planning on just wrapping up with having the main model done, which is mostly blocked out at this point, and then this is just an extra test I wanted to do really quickly. I wanted to get to texturing, but honestly, I did not move quickly enough, so we're going to have to do that as a separate phase. Okay, so we need a couple different colors here. Kind of like let's try 0.09. Okay, so we also want our secondary color, which is going to be this sort of smoke color. So we're going to mix this with our primary color and then our secondary color. And we can actually even work sort of embers into our material procedurally if we want, but I'm not going to bother with that at this stage. Okay, so that gives us kind of a red edge to our smoke, which I don't want. I want the interior to be red, so we're going to stick with this. And then drop a color ramp in here. Okay, cool. And I'm also going to up the resolution of our smoke just a bit. We want stylized, but at the same time we want it to look quality, not like we made a mistake. So I'm going to raise the resolution just a bit. Take another look at this. Okay. And I mean, that definitely will work. This would need to be refined further, but I'm just trying to test out the concept that we could use this technique to animate smoke on his gloves via simulation while we animate. And I think we've definitely proved that. So I'm going to go ahead and grab these guys and delete them now that experiment is done. And go back into my solid mode, recenter my cursor, and bring down this drop down since we don't need it anymore. Let's smooth out his chest plate and wrap up. And then we're going to use auto smooth again to give us that nice sharp crease. And I mean, this definitely needs more detailing, but this is a good start. We can now see all the different parts of our character. We have a plan for approaching it, and everything that we need to detail him is all here. So we need to add in sort of detail on the rivets on the armor, some more straps on the armor because they're kind of magically floating there right now, and then we'll start doing UVs to do the texturing. And then we're going to animate this guy because I'm actually really looking forward to it. It'll be cool to give him that kind of weight to his gauntlets. Okay. Sort of the last thing I like to do when I'm thinking I'm done with the model is to activate shadow and kind of just play the light around the surface to make sure that it has sort of good 3D presence. Down this a little bit, down to something like 0.3. And let's see which